But won't someone think of the museum funding? So you've got a guy whose literal hypothalamus gets eaten out of his head. The rest of his body is torn apart like a Quantum TV copyright takedown request in a courtroom, and whoever or whatever did it has still yet to be found. Why would you still proceed with a gala the following night? Well, because of that almighty dollar, baby. In the small town of Chicago, at the Field Museum of Natural History, a researcher was dispatched to make contact with the tribe and learn of their culture. However, as a prank bro, they end up giving him something that would transform his body into what is essentially a complete hormonal monster, or as we like to call them in our species, teenagers. And I can use that joke because of my advanced age now. But as the ship that was supposed to transport his findings in crates heads back to Chicago, the vessel then goes dark and sort of just like lazily lists through Lake Michigan for a few weeks before finally being picked up and brought back to the harbor. What was on this ship and what the crates would contain would be brought back to the museum to kick off an all-you-can-eat buffet scenario. So in today's episode, we will discuss the creature's morphology, how it came to be, what are those egg-looking things on the plant leaves, and how the body is impacted by their infection and subsequent DNA implementation. But first, this episode is sponsored by NordVPN. Are you ready to take back control of your internet experience today? Well, I hope you are, because if you aren't, I'm already tracking your IP address and I'm outside your door. Heading to nordvpn.com/Roanoke or clicking the link in the description, you can get a 2-year plan at a huge discount with an additional month free. So, what does Nord do? Well, with its new threat protection, it steps up cybersecurity to protect you from malicious sites, downloads, trackers, and intrusive ads. And even if your VPN is not turned on, it will continue to look out for and alert you to those threats. But with all that, you still get the protection of what NordVPN offers, such as changing your IP twice to cover web traffic, obfuscated servers which hide your internet traffic, and the ability to use the servers in over 59 countries with more than 5,400 servers, allowing you to jump across the planet so that I end up at the wrong door, all while maintaining an ultra-fast connection across multiple devices. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, head to nordvpn.com/Roanoke or click the link in the description to get the risk-free, money-back 30-day guarantee Nord offer. It's a 2-year plan with 1 month free. All right, let's get back to it. So as per usual, up on screen, there'll be a timestamp. If you want to bypass the summary of this movie and head straight into the science, go there. Now, I got a request to actually cover Relic, only to realize there is another movie from like 2020 about mold called Relic, and that possesses people or something. I don't know. I guess I'll have to cover them both. Anyways, let's get to why when you go to Chicago, you should just assume everyone there is trying to eat large portions of your brain. So we start off our story with this being paramount, so you already know I'm screwed with copyright. But we flash on over to the fires with tribesmen chanting and dancing around it. The main guy appears to be mixing up something while another man takes pictures of the ritual that is being performed. Leaves are grabbed that appear to have some sort of seeds on them that are then added to the boiling water. As the resulting tea is poured into a cup, it is given to a man who was taking the pictures. He basically just says screw it and drinks it before going on an awesome trip, or possibly not so awesome trip, because he's really just sort of like zoning out as a priest gets in front of his face, while then he cowers and talks about Kathoga and goes into full fetal position. Immediately heading to the harbor now that the acid trip has worn off, he tries to get the captain to take the cargo that he put on the boat back off the boat, but the captain basically tells him to go suck a railroad spike. So he does the next best thing, which is sneak onto the boat and hide amongst the crates. Heading to the storage area, he ends up finding his crates and opening them up, but he doesn't find what he was actually supposed to, as those are above deck for some reason, so he has a temper tantrum, screaming at the sky above. Heading to Chicago, the police now arrive at the harbor to investigate the ship. By the way, for some reason, custody of this guy's dog is like a running joke throughout the entire thing. Like, if you haven't seen this movie, the 90s, that's all I can say. So the ship is registered out of Brazil and there's blood all over it. Heading below, they're told that it was completely abandoned, so they just assume it was a drug thing gone wrong. But they open up the bilge to find, well, there's the crew completely torn apart. 1 week later, we are now over at the museum as 2 kids skip school and go to a museum. Okay. I swear, every adult at this point also is yelling, walk children! Like, let's see some action. Trip a kid. So bad natural parenting skills from me aside, as they walk up to a woman, they just sort of stare at her and she says that she's a doctor and an evolutionary biologist. What a nerd. I mean, she was really so close to the true Chad route of biology, which is microbiology. Oh well. As Margot walks in, Edna from The Incredibles goes to her and tells her that her rival is going after her grant money, despite him having his already. And I have to tell you, that is one of the most true events that has ever taken place in a movie. Scientists can be exceedingly political and backstabby if you aren't careful. Plus, they can honestly be some of the biggest bunch of bitches. So she says that Margot is better than Greg, but I have to say, Greg is the one who was there already on time. Anyhow, Margot goes and walks past John Whitney's office and sees the crates in there. Continuing to investigate the crates, she asks if anything was in there, but really nobody knows. There's just the leaves. However, looking at the leaves reveals some sort of egg, but it's suggested that it's a parasite. Dr. Frock suggests not to take any chances and that they should just go ahead and burn it. But as Margot keeps looking at it, he says go ahead and check out what it is. So like super late at night, the kids are still at the museum and the question is why? You already successfully skipped school. Go home already. But as the security guard goes to smoke tobacco only in the bathroom, we hear wheezing from something. He asks if it's another guard, but nope, it's Dumpelstiltskin grabbing him from underneath the stall with its big old monster hand. And if you get that reference, you can officially be my friend. Margot, meanwhile, is still in her lab portion of the museum putting little parasite eggs into vials. Oh, by the way, the rest of the science team is also there and they actually have a sense of humor, which is completely unreal, immersion broken, 0 out of 10. But the kids are also still there. Like the overhead PA system is like, the museum is closed. Go home. Margot goes and signs out and then hears doors opening. The kids head to the stairwell where they spot the monster mash and the hypothalamus smash before we jump on over to the next day. Then we get some amazing dialogue between Greg and Margot, and he says someone has got in the basement with a candlestick. She walks off and he yells, "Oh, you think I'm an asshole, right?" I mean, yes, bro. Someone just got their brains sucked out. Plus, who even says this? Very organic. The cops then stop Margot and bring her to Lieutenant D'Agosta. So this part is like really dumb here. There's this theme of superstition running throughout this whole movie, but as the lieutenant heads in with the other cops, the security guard's head is ripped off, right? But then Margot follows them in there a few seconds later. There were like 10 cops outside and nobody thought to stop her from entering a literal crime scene. So she has this freak out, as one does, over seeing a man just torn to shreds. But later she will accuse D'Agosta of not shutting the door and being the bad person. Like, I think deductive reasoning should have told Margot, oh hey, there's this murder. Maybe I shouldn't enter this room, just for funsies, but she does. So I don't know. My personal opinion, it's her own fault. You put your hand in a fire because nobody told you not to and your hand gets burnt, it's your fault. So now Edna, which I gotta tell you, I didn't even bother learning her real name because she's Edna from The Incredibles, reminds the lieutenant that they still need to be open for tomorrow, but D'Agosta reminds them they still have no idea where this person who did this actually is. They need to sweep the museum and make sure it's safe, which is a big museum, so that might take a hot minute. D'Agosta then goes to meet with Margot and apologize for leaving the door open, but again, she's the one who walked in. It's just a weird hang-up. D'Agosta then asked about John Whitney, as his office was vandalized after last night. Back over at the Relic restoration area, the person working on it says it's a chimera, so it's really hard to tell what she's working on. Chimera being the important part, we'll find out later. Margot says people either see it as a god or enemy. Just really depends on the superstition of the people. And we now get to the real good stuff, the autopsy. The ribcage had been sliced at the sternum with the pectoral muscles sliced in half, as well as opening the ribcage. The head has been cut off at the axial process and atlas, so C1 and C2, just at the base of the skull where the brainstem sits. The hit after came to the back of the head, with the occipital lobe being completely crushed, as well as a large portion of the parietal. After the guard was got, the brain was then pulled out through the hole. Apart from the damaged areas, the thalamic region is completely missing, which also means the pituitary area as well, so basically regulators of the hormones are absent. Meanwhile, after an Evian product placement, Margot's analysis of the fungus was reported back that it was loaded with hormones, specifically animal hormones, which, as you might imagine, is a bit strange. D'Agosta at this point tells them to check the bodies from the ship, see if the thalamic regions were taken from there as well. Meanwhile, Margot's does something you never do, and that's go into the closed exhibit at a museum at night that's based on superstitions when someone just literally got destroyed in the museum. If there's not believing in superstitions, then there's just spitting into the face of chance. That's all I'm saying. But as she walks around, she hears wheezing. Freaking out, she then hoofs it out of there and runs towards murder bathroom, but she's being followed. She gets on the toilet and then realizes it's just the cleaning lady currently having what sounds like a COPD attack because, good lord, that warrants a trip to the hospital. As the police continue searching for whoever destroyed the security guard, they end up finding a blood trail in the basement. D'Agosta gets a report that the people on the ship are all missing their hypothalamic regions too, concerning the attacks. D'Agosta then goes to Margot to talk to her about her field of study. He asks if we are still evolving, and she says yes. Is that good or bad? Well, it depends. We really don't have any natural predators anymore, so we're sort of off the reservation as far as what the future holds. Either way, it'll be an interesting ride. Anyhow, Margot takes D'Agosta to Dr. Frock to discuss Whitney. I know, like 12 names in 4 seconds. As they discuss the works of Whitney and what he's doing, Dr. Frock mentions how he believes in the Calisto Effect, which basically suggests that life evolves gradually over time, but some event causes the creation of a short-lived aberrant species to spring up out of nowhere. So now you know what the Calisto Protocol is referencing when it comes out. D'Agosta then asks them, would this cause someone to, I don't know, eat a hypothalamus out of humans' brains? Which everyone's like, dude, what? So the cops in the basement just straight up into homeless man at this point, but the movie added like this insectoid noise to him, which was just ridiculous. That said, he was into to young pre-adults, so I guess really he got what was coming to him. So they pin the attack on the museum to him. It was the homeless convict with an axe in the bathroom. And we now meet the mayor of Chicago, who requests to be called Your Honor. It's a big no from me, dog, but then again, they say I have a problem with authority. Anyhow, the mayor basically tells him the gala needs to happen, so good job on finding the problem. DaGosta then tells him basically they need all of Chicago PD there that night because he doesn't believe that they actually found the guy responsible for what's happening. I mean, that guy would literally have to punch through a skull, so I don't really know. At this point, Margot opens up the box containing the leaves and finds one of the beetles has completely changed into something different. It has apparently somehow gotten gecko DNA in its beetle DNA. Greg walks by as Margot continues working, and everyone is now arriving at the museum. To attempt to find whatever is in the sewer system, they break out the dogs and get it sent to track it. Dr. Frock comes down to tell Margot to get ready, and she says that she ran another analysis and found the fungus contains reverse transcriptase. Dr. Frock suggests it's heavily infested with a virus, but it appears to be the fungus itself that is encoding the DNA it acquires in the cells of other eukaryotic organisms for animal proteins. So we now get to your standard juxtaposition between the cops in the sewer system looking for a monster and high society eating tiny salmon crackers. Dr. Frock and Margot continue to talk about the plant. The plant itself has a high concentration of what is found in the human hypothalamus within its cells to an astronomically more potent degree, which they piece together whatever it is needs the hormones on the leaves, but it's settling for human brains in the meantime. The dogs are now on the trail of the monster, which now we get to witness incompetence to the highest degree. So this museum is like ultra secure for some reason. The security personnel are discussing if they should close down the lab wing, and rather than send someone to check, if anyone's in there, they just trust Greg over here after saying it was completely abandoned when he left. So good enough for them. So they end up locking it down, subsequently trapping Margot and Dr. Frock. This causes Margot to form the idea of taking the man in a wheelchair down a set of stairs to the sub-basement. We now discover that a coal line runs all the way from the museum to Lake Michigan, and this is how they sent coal in to keep Chicago warm. They cut the dogs loose as they are on the scent of something at this point, and one of the dogs gets got, which then sends the handler, Bradley, running after Pollux. DaGosta sends another officer back to get more backup as he goes after Bradley. Bradley eventually does find Pollux, but then gets immediately eaten, but Pollux is still left alive. High Society is meeting in front of a new exhibit, completely unaware of what's happening below them. DaGosta is now on his own as Bradley has become brain soup. As he moves along, he finds a bone pile of human skeletons before finding Pollux down there, who's pretty jazzed to see DaGosta. The cops now head up to the exhibit to get the mayor out. As they arrive, a body is then dropped on an exhibit for some reason, which causes a panic. I mean, hold up, wait, the thing was in the sewer with them, or in the coal chute, just 4 seconds ago. How is it now back in the museum? I mean, I get it's fast, but no, it's not that fast. Anyways, at this point, the security system of the museum, the security system begins spazzing out, which means it was in the friggin' power room. How did it drop a body in the exhibit? Unless there's 12 of these things, which there's not. There's only one. Anyways, so like I said, the museum begins spazzing out as all the fire doors are shut and locked, and the power to the building is cut. So that's good. This causes even more panic because water, which High Society turns into what we all turn into when panicked, a bunch of idiots. As people are literally tripping and trampling over one another, the big fire doors continue to come down, and good lord, holy crush zone, Batman. The security in the back realizes that they need to get the power back on, so we get this almost Jurassic Park moment. One of the personnel walks out and the guard's like, oh, leave the door unlocked. I don't like it when you lock the door. Then he goes in, realizes the wires have been ripped out and fried as something attacked it. He then heads back into the security room, talking to his partner, then goes, hey dude, why aren't you saying anything back? But the guy's been decapitated and he's next. Definitely a hold on to your butts moment for sure. In fact, actually, there's been a couple points where I'm like, man, this is really Jurassic Park-esque. So DaGosta now goes to security to find everyone in there has gotten got. There's some argument taking place inside the museum of what they should do while they're waiting. DaGosta tells them to take the coal line out of the museum. They continue arguing amongst each other, and one of the officers stays behind, breaking up the coffee dream team. I know I haven't mentioned them before, but that was their whole thing, coffee and discussing coffee. So you either somebody gets custody of your dog or you discuss coffee. This was 90s. As DaGosta sees a door opening, Pollux is growling. He bursts in to find Margot and Dr. Frock before turning around and seeing that the thing is actually charging them. Pollux the dog does the smart thing and says, screw this, breaks off the collar and runs. DaGosta is able to get the door closed in time, but it just barely holds up. Honestly, had that thing probably kept trying to break in, it could have done it. Realizing that this was a regular animal that has now turned into something else, they also figure out that it needs hormones for its own body to regulate its functions or it will meet its end, which is why it keeps attacking everyone. Dr. Frock elects to stay behind while Margot and DaGosta go and figure out what exactly was that crap that was leaking out from under the door after it attacked. So now the cavalry has arrived and is attempting to cut open the door. Seriously, if this is a real fire door, why would it close from the the front. Don't people need to get out? This seems like surely this doesn't exist. Anyways, those that stayed behind in the museum are now getting attacked by the creature as it's beginning to tear heads off and flinging cops everywhere, knocking them out. Getting a look at this thing, well, it's pretty ugly. Like a fish frogman thing. And it's going after Greg as it eats him, and then we hear the Wilhelm scream, which is pretty hilarious. So they finally get a result back from the DNA analysis. This thing is still changing and becoming more reptilian. National Guard members are being dropped onto the roof to enter the museum to get everyone out. At least I think they're National Guard. But as they descend, the creature begins attacking them one by one and just tearing off heads. I mean, that totally blows. You think someone would like yell up about this crap? But anyhow, this thing can climb the walls, so it's not like it's having a tough time getting anyone, and the personnel up top can't seem to pull up one guy with their weak little baby arms, so he gets totally bisected. As Dr. Frock sits in what is basically a cage, the thing comes to visit him. It looks like a mix of a predator and a dog. Margot and Dagosta then realize that since it's mostly reptilian, its body temp is not stabilized, so maybe they could freeze it. As Margot goes to get Dr. Frock, they realize that he's been eaten as well, or at least his brain has. On the heels of the group that was sent into the coal chute, the officer in charge states that he thinks this thing is following them back there. Dagosta and Margot then go to create a distraction to get it to come to them instead. As the group moves through chest-high water, the officer in the back gets grabbed and pulled under and decapitated, so definitely no more talk about coffee. At this point, others begin getting grabbed and taken away as well before it breaks off its attack for a moment. Dagosta now gives Margot his lucky bullet as she gets ready to freeze the thing and puts the leaves on the grate. The creature ascends momentarily and looks at him before going back under. And as it ascends once more, it's about to attack Dagosta, but he's able to force multiply it in the face as freezing it did absolutely nothing because it appears that it does still have some warm-blooded tendencies. So Team 1 has now officially made it out of the coal chute a little lighter than before. Margot and Dagosta, however, are still down there with that thing on their tail. Also, the firefighters are almost done cutting through the door. Margot and Dagosta argue about who should be safe, to which Margot's analysis has now finished, finding out who the DNA belongs to. Well, surprise, surprise, it's John Whitney. I'm as shocked as you are. As Margot runs to find Dagosta, here's Johnny. Crashing through the roof, he has now begun basically just looking for her. Dagosta is hilariously stuck behind the door that he locked to try to protect her, so he's not much help. And also, Whitney is just breaking down the doors that Margot closed like they didn't do anything. So Margot goes around opening up every single chemical container that they have, as well as mixing some together. Potentially, I thought it was to cover percent of her hypothalamus, but it's actually something else because it really doesn't work, and John finds her pretty easily. But luckily, there's some serious plot armor on her, and it stops before biting off her head. Maybe it recognizes her, not sure yet. But she drops the chemical that ends up exploding. It appears possible it may have been pure sodium dropped in water, which ignites all the chemicals in the area on fire, burning Whitney before it finally explodes. However, Whitney is hot on Margot's tail. She hits the soup of the day lid and jumps in as Whitney is trapped in the explosion and exploded. And I gotta tell ya, this was the slowest moving explosion I think I have ever seen in my life. The mayor now threatens the police chief to leave Dagosta alone, seeing as he saved everyone, which I'm not sure about the politics there, but Anyways, the creature has been destroyed. They find Margot is stuck in the tank and let her out, and Dagosta has survived the attack, all thanks to the lucky bullet. I mean, you know, presumably. But they forgot about the biggest monster of all in Chicago, the crumbling infrastructure. Ooh, that's a really lame joke. With all that wrapped up, I think we all learned, if a tribesman hands you a drink and you have no idea what's in it, probably the last thing you want to say is, screw it, and then chug that down like a college freshman at a frat party doing a keg stand. Because it might just be the actually, that's the wrong thing. It might just be a similar fungus. So where do we begin with this one? I think to understand the operation of the fungus and how it alters the human form, or really any form it comes into contact with, we must first understand what has happened to the person infected and subsequently how they became the Kathoga, or really any animal infected, which just becomes a bastardization of their original evolutionary pathway. Because we haven't done this in like forever, this is going to have to be something you relatively trust me on as I pull the concept art to make sure that I could actually see this thing properly. So you know where we have to start. Starting with the feet, we see this creature is quadrupedal with 4 large limbs in equal mass to one another. The back appendages have claws several inches in length, hypothesized to be around 5 to 8 inches, which allows it to dig into walls and scale up anything that it would like. The hind limbs of this creature, for the most part, is walking on the balls of its feet, but considering its chimeric nature, this is to be expected. The structuring of the leg overall is digitigrade with a sharp 90-degree angle formed between the ankle and gastrocnemius and soleus when walking forward. But when it's standing and not moving forward, the angle is less aggressive. The thighs are not particularly muscular on their own, or at least their appearance is covered by a large, thick, scaly covering. In fact, in the book, this scaling is so thick that force multiplication is virtually useless against it, as the bullets will either deflect off the body entirely or will not pierce deep enough to damage anything vital. On the back of Kathoga exists a tail that resembles that of reptiles. The tail, when running and jumping, would likely stabilize the chimeric beast, giving it agility that would not be suspected concerning its size. We see some of the mammalian traits are also emerging diverging concerning the tail, as around this area, hair has sprouted out of the lower lumbar spinal area, right around where the human tailbone would sit, which is likely also owed to the human element, as hey, we evolved to have hair back there, thicker if you're a male. That's classic. Moving up to the abdomen area, we see the skin here is actually appearing to be thinner and likely would be more susceptible to damage, as the smoothness denotes potentially thinness here, which I would like to go on a side tangent for a moment about actually Kathoga is better put together than humans are. So I mentioned this previously, but humans are creatures that our setup sort of sucks. Our bodies still readily indicate that quadrupedalism was in our past. And is that a word? I'm not sure, but today it is. So take an animal walking around on all fours, right? Well, on the outside of its legs, you have leg meat, bone, portions of the pelvis protecting the internals of the leg, where things like the femoral artery and femoral vein sit. Things that need to be protected, which usually are by the aforementioned. Well, with humans, because we stand upright, there is a triangle in our groin area that completely exposes this critical area to damage, as nothing is protecting it from the front, seeing as we have really not had time to evolve protection in this area. It's actually pretty hilarious just how bad our design is actually. To add to that, take our greater omentum in our abdomen that lays against the inside of our abdominal muscle wall. In quadrupedal animals, should they take a hit to the guts that pierces this wall, the greater omentum will actually fill the hole, hopefully stopping the bleeding, because gravity is pulling the membrane into the new wound. However, because humans walk upright, the greater omentum just sort of hangs down, which means gravity cannot pull it into the wound. Although I will say, if someone gets stabbed, their first inclination is to double over, potentially allowing the omentum to do its job. But I just wanted to tell you that John Whitney turning into this creature actually ended up solving a lot of horrible design flaws of the human body. Anyhow, so now that we know how bad our bodies are at bodying, moving up to the torso of Kathoga, the creature has a large barrel-chested appearance, likely indicating massive lungs and a large heart. The skin of the back resembles that of a crocodile with large spines that jut upwards around mid-thoracic. Flanking each side of the chest sits powerful forelimbs that are as large as the hind limbs. The triceps on this thing is ridiculous. Like, you ever seen a picture of a tiger? That's what it looks like. On the elbows of this creature, there's a few sharp protrusions, which can be used to slash as it runs. And descending down the arms to the hands, we see that 1/3 of the limb is simply composed of just hands. The human features are all but obliterated concerning these hands. They are actually appearing exceedingly gecko, with the two middle fingers being larger than the other smaller fingers flanking the sides. Something that can be seen on the hands are folds of skin like with geckos, which is actually how they attach themselves to walls, so likely that's how this thing uses its forelimbs to walk up walls. But the claws are also large and are regularly used for slashing. Moving back up to the neck, he's a wide boy. The neck is just barely smaller than the torso, showing there is a very poor delineation between where the torso ends and the neck begins, and even where the head is as well, as it's all compacted into one large space. On the back of the neck exists a sort of mane of what we see with equines. And then moving to the head, well, chimeric additions to John's DNA did him no favors. The head is oval in shape, and actually a comparison could be drawn between him looking like an anglerfish more than anything, just an anglerfish with a body. The brow ridge has retreated up the head and turned almost adjacent to where it would normally sit on a human. The eyes are beady and small, but forward-facing, denoting that he is still predatory. If him tearing apart people was enough to indicate that. But I did have someone just recently tell me that forward-facing eyes does not mean that something was a predator, because things like gorillas are not predators. Well, eyes facing forward suggest a predator because it allows for stereoscopic vision, which in turn allows depth to be judged, which predators need to track prey. Now, a case can be made when it comes to, say, like snakes, sharks, alligators, etc., that they do not have forward-facing eyes, therefore not everything with forward-facing eyes is a predator. But just remember, forward-facing eyes typically is indicative of predators, which I now have to remind you, Keebler elves have forward-facing eyes. We all know the average Keebler can run up to 35 miles per hour if it smells a child's blood, so you wonder why they're trying to give us all cookies. It's to make us slower. So mental breakdown that I just had aside, the Kathoga's lower face is where the real horrible stuff is. The mouth opens up to reveal teeth several inches in length that curve out and then back into a point. Flanking each side of the mouth are two sets of tusks, although really mandible would be more appropriate. The creature can use these to wrap around a human's neck and lift them up, and then use the forelimbs to basically just pull down on the body, separating the calcium container from the meat suit, as made mention during the autopsy, with the C1 to C2 separated, which is a pretty precise severing actually. Pretty sure that would send you to immediate shock, so you really wouldn't feel too much. Not a great way to go though. The overall body is again protected by a thick scaly hide capable of withstanding everything, except for the slowest moving explosion I've ever seen in my life. That's where the line is drawn. So with its morphology covered, we can now begin to start understanding how it may be possible that this thing came to be. So I have to ask you, are you ready to give up on the human race? Well, you may be after I tell you this. So DNA, as we know, is critical to cellular function. Without DNA to literally be the foundation, house, and environment of gene expression, there is no life. We are just organic molecules floating around doing nothing. I literally saw a tweet the other day with a dude saying that DNA plays no part in our lives. Like, it's apparently completely useless. I don't think I've been stunned a lot in my life, but that just, it threw me for a loop. I cannot believe this person knows knows how to spell, and that's what they chose to spell out. Twitter strikes again, I suppose. But the point of me mentioning DNA in the first place is the importance it has. Now, I don't think I have to sit here and tell you about DNA, but I am, because genetics is good stuff. DNA directs everything. It's essentially the roadmap and compass for our bodies, as well as a set of rules. Our body will read DNA to create everything we need as long as ribosomes have material in which to build it in the first place. The flow of this is fairly simple, as whatever is in the DNA or whatever is needed is then translated from DNA into something known as messenger RNA or mRNA. This mRNA is then read in order by the molecules called transfer RNAs or tRNAs. Then the tRNAs will link up with the ribosomes, which will then link together the amino acids to form the polypeptide for now that to go out and do its job. A little dry, but the point is protein synthesis is really as simple as getting the info from DNA to make it into RNA. The ribosomes then turn it into a protein, which as we know is a building block for cells in general. But something to note about proteins is that they can also be hormones. So buckle up, because we are about to get into why Kathoga is snacking on human thalamic regions, because we need to learn about the endocrine system. And also some people say endocrine. It's a lot like Neanderthal or Neanderthal. It doesn't matter whichever way you pronounce it. Don't be an elitist. Without the endocrine system, there is no point in attempting to be multicellular. Hormones are critical to the function of the human body and signal physiological changes to one another, as well as in general the upkeep of your life. There are several examples all throughout history of issues with the endocrine system affecting a person in a massive way. For some, if there's an issue with, say, the pituitary gland not signaling to the rest of the body that they need to begin the process of puberty, which actually can be caused by something like nutrition deficiencies or certain tumors that grow in the pituitary gland, which there's a story about a kid who ended up getting part of his, I believe, he got all of his large intestine and like 75% of his small intestine sucked out of his body. So he could never actually get the nutrition that he needed. So he literally did not age or look like he aged past, I think it was like 13 or 14 years old. But again, this can, if you have issues with the pituitary gland or lack of nutrition, this can literally cause a person to have the typical age of puberty bypass them, which will leave them smaller in stature than a standard adult and with more childlike features such as a smoother brow ridge, larger eye to skull ratio, shorter limbs, less muscle mass as well as bone mass, and could cause things like sterility issues. And that's all because your hormones are just not signaling correctly. In others, an almost second puberty can be activated within people after adulthood has been reached under the same issues, resulting in gigantism in Homo sapiens. This can lead to people being well over 7 feet tall, with structure changes to the skull and limbs, resulting in difficulty eating and speaking, nerve damage in their limbs as they continue to grow and stretch the nerves past their normal capacity, and difficulty walking, as well as extra strain on the heart to account for the new body mass. And this is all, again, under the influence of the endocrine system at work. The endocrine system serves as a way for cells to signal one another that something needs to be done. Our bodies are a well-oiled machine, but when that process fails, it fails in a big way that is readily noticeable. But essentially, these hormones are sent out into the body to get into another cell to create a protein that the body may need, which in turn is subsequently created for the body to use. The issue, as mentioned previously, arises when the body doesn't need the cells to undergo the protein creation process, or cells are signaled incorrectly or in error, which causes their activation, which can then screw with the homeostasis. Or hormones are not released as they should be, and cells are never told what they need to do, so they continue on like normal, which can then lead to disruptions in the body that can ultimately be fatal if not addressed. And this is the issue that we see with Kathoga. It's clear that the chimera additions to the DNA have completely jacked up its ability to produce its own hormones, which probably isn't shocking to anyone, as this is the whole premise. But the main question is, why did it turn out this way? Well, again, it goes back to protein synthesis. While our genetic coding is largely junk DNA or ancient viruses that left their coding behind that has been inherited by the offspring, a lot of DNA serves critical functions to the survivability of a creature, such as hormone production and release. When John ingested the fungus from those leaves, as made mention by Dr. Frock, this fungus was infested with a virus that contains reverse transcriptase. But I don't think it was a virus coding for animal proteins. I believe the fungus itself, which may have been mentioned, but I don't really recall if it was or not, is really the one with the reverse transcriptase, which let's go into that for a moment. Not my dementia about the fungus. So what is reverse transcriptase? Well, Dr. Frock was correct. As we know it, typically it's viruses that hold this enzyme. But the reality is we have found reverse transcriptase in bacteria, animals, plants, and likely fungi. So really, it's not just relegated to the land of viruses. But what it does with specifically viruses is they will attach to a cell, drop off its RNA along with reverse transcriptase, and then it has the ability to encode that RNA into the DNA, and then will insert itself into the genome of a cell, forever being a part of that cell. And that's why HIV is so bad, because as it enters your cell, it literally encodes into your genome, meaning that whenever that sequence is read, boom, more HIV is made. This allows the coding to continue even if the cell undergoes replication, and then it's passed along if it's inserted into sex cells, and so on and so forth, until the gene is likely eventually broken through sexual reproduction, with genes being recombined and mixed to create offspring. Fragments, however, still persist within the genome, which is how we now know we are about 8% viral coding. But the issue is implantation into the genome of a creature. It's clear that the fungi is using reverse transcriptase to implant into John's genetic coding. Likely a large portion of John's own coding was separated, breaking many gene functions along the way to insert some random gecko DNA. Then further down the line, fish DNA would be inserted, where potentially the gene to produce, say, human growth hormone would be located. But that fish DNA had a piece of its own DNA broken off where things like oxytocin would have been produced. Basically, the fungus did not necessarily care where genes were or were not broken to be inserted into another's genome, and as a result, this caused the chimeric additions to be an absolute detriment to the function of the human body. This also had the effect of new protein structures arising within the body of John to also change his physical appearance. As the body would continue trying to read the genome in order to produce the things that the body needed, this would do two things. First, the hormones necessary for the creature's survival would be corrupted and not be able to be made. This resulted in signaling to break down if Kathoga did not get the fungi, which contained the hormones that he needed. This is why he was going crazy for the plant leaves, because ultimately, if he did not ingest the fungus, his cells would devolve into a self-destructive pattern. But also likely where the genes was located to produce that many hormones needed, seeing as it was broken down and replaced, would cause other proteins and chemical messengers to likely be created instead. As these flooded the body, they would begin telling the cells to do some very strange things. While the cells were still somewhat human, remember, it's just a cell. It has no affinity for some particular structure concerning what we would like, just as long as the cell itself survives. Being directed by the hormones, whether those be lipid-based or protein, were still created in the body through the direction of foreign DNA. And this would tell the cell that the body structure should look this way instead, and whether that be a crocodile, fish, or Leopleurodon. Now, typically, however, your physiology is determined when you are gestating, and you really cannot change it all that much, barring some injury of some sort. But again, just like with gigantism, the body is able to be changed to a relatively large degree, not unrecognizable to the Kathoga standard, but still change with the direction of hormones. And this is what I believe is happening. Even though John is still, or I guess, he was a human, the foreign directions are still changing his body, causing his skin to thicken and change colors as new melanin production pigments are made and skin growth increases, causing callus raised areas. The bones are told to soften and lengthen under the direction of osteoclasts, then by releasing osteoblasts to re-strengthen them in their new forms. Organs would likely continue growing as well as growth factor was added, but you also need to remember John was actually still getting the fungi for a time. In the book it was more apparent, but as made mention by Margot when she mentions the potency of the fungus concerning these hormones, my fish boy John over here was eating this, introducing massive amounts of things like human growth hormone into his body. This, coupled with the new formation from his genetic coding, means that the body was primed for growth, and what a weird growth it was. If he was all human, he would have likely just become absolutely shredded and larger than the average person in height. But because of the interference of other genomes, he instead became a monster that is hypothesized to be 10 to 15 feet in length, which comes out to 3 to 4.5 meters in length, and stand roughly 7 feet tall on all fours, or about 2.1 meters. When the plants were incinerated after being taken off the boat, he no longer had access to the fungus that was not only keeping his body operating as if in normal conditions, seeing as he was dependent on them and could not create the necessary hormones himself, likely on par with someone who may have type 1 diabetes and cannot produce insulin by themselves or have difficulty producing it. It meant he became reliant on outside means. But with the addition of such a potent amount of hormones, this would continue to alter him as well. In the book, they mention that really John didn't turn to taking out people until the leaves were taken away from his grasp, and that required him to try to find an alternative, which, considering he used to be human, means he needed the area that has the highest concentration of hormones in the human body, which was the thalamic region of the brain. But all this indicates also that John is still somewhat there mentally. While his body has been warped and changed by the introduction of foreign DNA and a ludicrous amount of hormones, his brain still possesses the same connections as in those have not been severed, just because the DNA of the neuron itself has changed. Now, he in no way is still operating with the same capacity of higher thinking the average person enjoys, but it's likely more like a memory that you can barely just sort of recall, but you really just get a feeling of when you look at something that you used to remember what it was. For instance, sometimes when I look out like into woods or anything that have specific spacing between trees on a cloudy day, it makes me like almost remember something about my childhood, about playing in woods. That sounds nefarious, but it's a good memory, trust me. But I can't actually recall what I'm trying to remember. I think the phrase I've seen people use is like superliminal spaces. That's basically what John is seeing when he sees Margot and then stops himself from attacking her. His brain still maintains some connections from his human life. Like again, literally the connections are there. They're physical connections between the neurons, and that would likely likely indicate that a memory is present, but because his brain's functions have been altered due to the changes with his body, it's like a memory of a memory, making that control fleeting.